Most people think Dexter Morgan was just a clever twist on the crime show. A killer with a badge, a monster with a schedule. The people who built him were working from something stranger. A single thought at a lunch meeting, and a code nobody could agree was real. In this video, we break down 100 mysterious facts about Dexter. Fact 1. Dexter began as a novel. Jeff Lindsay published Darkly Dreaming Dexter in 2004, 2 years before the show reached television, and the first season follows that book closely for most of its run, right down to individual scenes, before the two versions part company in the final stretch. The blood-spatter job, the boat, the brother, the code, all of it existed on the page first. Showtime bought the rights before the book had built much of an audience, which meant the network was gambling on a character almost nobody had heard of. The novel is written entirely in Dexter's voice, and that choice shaped the show more than any casting decision did. Television usually shows a killer from the outside, through the detectives chasing him down. Lindsay put the reader inside the head of the man holding the knife, and the show preserved that by running Dexter's narration underneath nearly every scene. The audience is never allowed to watch him from a safe distance. They are stuck listening to him explain himself, and that is the engine the entire thing runs on. The man who wrote that book found the idea in the least likely room imaginable. Fact 2. Lindsay has told the origin story of Dexter many times, and it always lands in the same place. He was speaking at a Kiwanis Club luncheon, a room full of ordinary people eating ordinary food, and he looked out at the crowd and had a thought that surprised him. The thought was that murder is not always a bad thing, depending on who is being murdered. He has framed it as a joke that got away from him, a stray idea that would not leave once it arrived. That single moment produced everything that followed. The character came out of a feeling most people have and immediately pushed down, the private sense that certain people have earned something terrible. Lindsay took that feeling and gave it a face, a job, a family, and a set of rules. The reason the character worked on such a large scale is that the original thought was not unusual at all. Almost everyone has had a version of it. Almost nobody builds a career on top of it. The name printed on the cover of that book does not belong to him. Fact 3. Jeff Lindsay is a pen name. The author was born Jeffrey P. Freundlich, and the name on the Dexter novels comes from his wife, the writer Hillary Hemingway. That surname carries its own weight. Hillary is the niece of Ernest Hemingway, daughter of his younger brother Lester, which places the creator of one of the most famous fictional killers of the last 20 years inside one of the most famous literary families in American history. The connection goes further than a surname. Hillary Hemingway has written about the family, including books dealing with the Hemingway suicides and the shadow bad, those deaths cast across generations. Her husband spent the following decade writing about a man shaped by a childhood horror he cannot remember properly, carrying something inherited that he did not choose and cannot put down. The overlap between those two projects has never been claimed by either writer as intentional. It sits there anyway, quiet in the background of a series about inherited darkness. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The man who turned that novel into a television pilot had already written one of the most famous hours of TV ever made. Fact 4. The pilot was written by James Manos Jr., and his most famous previous credit is an episode of The Sopranos called College, the one where Tony takes Meadow on a campus tour and kills a former associate along the way. That episode is regularly named among the best television episodes ever produced, and the script won an Emmy for Manos and series creator David Chase. It is also the episode that settled a long argument at HBO about whether the audience would keep watching a lead character after seeing him commit murder with his own hands. Manos brought that exact question to Dexter and pushed it much further. Tony killed once during a family trip. Dexter kills as a routine, as a hobby, as a scheduled part of his week. The pilot works because Manos already knew the answer to the question the network was nervous about. Audiences will follow a killer anywhere as long as they understand him. Understanding is not approval, and the show spends 8 seasons living in the gap between the two. The actor who took the role had spent 5 years working in a house full of dead bodies. Fact 5. Michael C. Hall came to Dexter directly from 6 Feet Under, where he played David Fisher, a funeral director who spends his days preparing corpses and his nights managing a private life he keeps carefully hidden. He went from a man who tends to bodies after death to a man who creates them, and both characters share the same quiet trait of performing normal behavior while something entirely separate runs underneath. The casting was not accidental. Hall had already proven he could carry a series where death is ordinary background furniture rather than a shock. He had also proven he could play a man whose face gives away almost nothing. That skill is what makes Dexter possible. Nearly every scene requires him to be two people at once, the one everyone in the room can see and the one only the audience is allowed access to. Hall performs that split constantly, usually without any obvious signal that he is doing it. The credit sequence that opens every episode was built to disturb people who had not seen a single frame of the show. Fact 6. The opening titles show Dexter making breakfast. He shaves. He cuts an orange. He fries an egg. He ties his shoes. He grinds coffee. The sequence was designed by the studio Digital Kitchen, and every shot is filmed the way violence is normally filmed. Blood-red juice, a nick on the skin, meat torn apart, a lace pulled tight around a wrist. Nothing violent actually happens. The camera simply treats an ordinary morning as though it were a murder. The point is that the audience learns to see the world the way Dexter does before the first line of dialogue arrives. Once the sequence has done its work, breakfast is no longer innocent, and neither is anything else. The titles were praised throughout the industry and became one of the most imitated openings of the decade. They also perform a piece of storytelling that the show itself never has to state out loud, which is that the horror in Dexter lives in the routine wrapped around the killing, rather than in the killing itself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The sunlight in Miami on that show is not Miami sunlight at all. Fact 7. Dexter is set in Miami and was shot in California. The production based itself in Long Beach, with Miami Metro built on sound stages and neighborhoods across Southern California, standing in for Florida streets. A second unit shot, establishing footage in Florida, and that footage is stitched into episodes to sell the location, but the actors spent most of the run working thousands of miles from the city the show is named after. The substitution created a specific problem the crew worked around constantly. Florida light is heavy and wet. California light is dry and clean. The production compensated with color grading, with palm trees selected carefully, with wardrobe and set dressing loaded with pastel and chrome. The result is a version of Miami that feels slightly unreal, a little too bright and too clean, which suits a show about a man whose entire surface life is a construction. The city itself is a performance, matching the man walking through it. Everything in his apartment is exactly where it should be, except one box. Fact 8. Dexter keeps his trophies inside an air conditioning unit, mounted in the wall of his apartment. Behind the vent sits a wooden case holding glass slides, each one carrying a single drop of blood taken from a person he has killed. It is the only object in his home that means anything, and he built the hiding place into a machine designed to hum quietly and be ignored. The slides are a strange choice for a man who insists he feels nothing. He does not keep photographs or clothing or jewelry. He keeps blood, which is the exact material he studies for a living, prepared using the exact method his job requires. The collection is a laboratory archive of his private life, filed and labeled with the same discipline he applies at work. He tells himself it is a habit. Everything about the way it is stored suggests it is a record, kept by someone who wants proof that his life actually happened. The boat he uses to dispose of the bodies has a name that gives the whole thing away. Fact 9. Dexter's boat is called Slice of Life. He uses it to carry bagged remains into the Gulf Stream, and he named it himself. For a man who spends every waking hour concealing what he is, that name is an astonishing risk. It sits painted on the back of the vessel, where anyone at the marina can read it. A joke aimed at a punchline nobody around him knows exists. That impulse recurs across the entire series. He signs a bowling team, he attends barbecues, he makes small comments that carry a second meaning, available only to himself. The boat name is the largest example. He is alone with his knowledge, and a person carrying a secret that total will eventually leave something in public just to prove the secret is real. The show treats it as a character detail. It functions as evidence that Dexter wants to be known far more than he admits to wanting anything. The name on the boat is the joke he tells himself every time he leaves the dock, and nobody at that marina has ever once asked him what it means. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The plastic sheeting in the kill room became one of the biggest ongoing expenses on the entire production. Fact 10. The kill room is a ritual space. Dexter tapes plastic over every wall, ceiling, floor, and object, seals the room into a smooth white box, and lays out his tools in a fixed order. The production built that room over and over across 8 seasons, and the amount of plastic sheeting consumed became a running fact of life for the crew. Every kill required a fresh set, and every set had to hang perfectly, because a wrinkle in the wrong place reads as sloppy on camera. The plastic serves a practical purpose in the story, and a symbolic one for the audience. Dexter is a blood spatter analyst who has spent his professional life studying how blood travels through a room. His hobby is the same knowledge running backwards. He builds a space where blood cannot travel anywhere at all. The most controlled man on television makes his own private clean room, kills inside it, and folds the whole thing up afterward, like it never existed. The drug he uses to knock people out could not possibly work the way the show says it does. Fact 11. Dexter sedates his victims with a drug he calls M99, which is a real veterinary compound known as etorphine. It exists, it is used on large animals, and it is extraordinarily powerful. It is also nothing like the version in the show. Real etorphine does not drop a grown man in 2 seconds from a syringe pressed into the neck, and the dosage line between unconscious and dead is so thin that a person doing this weekly would be leaving a trail of corpses long before the plastic ever went up. Medical professionals have picked this apart since the first season aired. The show needed a clean tool that removes the struggle from every capture, because a realistic sedation scene would take minutes and destroy the pacing of every episode. M99 is the shortcut that lets the story move. It is also one of the few places where a series obsessed with forensic accuracy quietly abandons accuracy entirely, and almost nobody in the audience noticed until doctors started writing about it. His actual job title is based on a science that experts have spent years arguing about. Fact 12. Blood spatter analysis is the profession that gives Dexter his access to crime scenes, his police credentials, and his reputation as a quiet genius. In the real world, it has been under sustained scrutiny for a long time. Forensic reviews have flagged the field for relying heavily on the judgment of individual examiners rather than on measurements that can be reproduced by anyone else, and several convictions built on spatter testimony have been revisited as a result. The show arrived during the peak of forensic television, when audiences trusted lab work as close to magic. Dexter walks into a room, looks at a wall, and describes exactly what happened in it. The confidence is part of the character, and it doubles as the show telling the audience that he sees things others cannot. What sits underneath is more interesting. His entire legitimate career rests on interpretation dressed as certainty, which is a fair description of the code he lives by as well. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. His first name was chosen for a reason nobody in the show ever mentions. Fact 13. The word Dexter comes from Latin and means right, as in the right hand, and it carries a second meaning of skillful or favorable. The English word dexterity comes from the same root. Its opposite in Latin is sinister, which means left, and which arrived in English carrying the sense of something threatening and wrong. A character named Dexter is therefore named for the good hand, the capable hand, the one people are supposed to trust. The surname does its own work. Morgan is common enough to disappear into any crowd, which is precisely what he needs. Put together, the name reads as a man who is skilled and unremarkable. Neither half of it hints at what he actually is. Lindsay has never made a large claim about the naming, but the symmetry is difficult to ignore in a series built around a man performing normality with his right hand, while the other one does something else entirely. The rules he lives by were handed to him by a man who is dead before the show begins. Fact 14. Harry Morgan, Dexter's adoptive father is a Miami homicide detective who recognizes what his son is going to become and decides to steer it rather than stop it. The result is the Code of Harry, a set of rules that keeps Dexter alive and keeps him aimed at people who have killed and escaped consequences. Never get caught, be certain of guilt, control the urge, never let it control the situation. The genius of the code as a storytelling device is that it turns a monster into an employee. Dexter is not free. He is following instructions written by a police officer who loved him and gave up on saving him in the same breath. Every season tests the code, bends it, and eventually breaks it. The rules exist so the audience can watch a man discover that the structure he was raised inside was never built for his benefit. It was built to manage him. The father delivering those rules is standing in rooms where he cannot possibly be. Fact 15. Harry appears constantly across the series, despite having died years before the first episode. James Remar plays him in flashbacks, and, more importantly, as a figure only Dexter can see, standing in kill rooms and living rooms and offering commentary on decisions in progress. The show never treats him as a ghost. He is a projection, an internal voice, wearing a familiar face. That device does something subtle. Harry's advice changes across the seasons, becoming harsher, more sarcastic, more willing to insult Dexter directly. Since Harry is entirely a construction of Dexter's own mind, every one of those insults is Dexter speaking to himself. The version of his father he carries around deteriorates as his own self-image deteriorates. The audience is watching a man argue with a memory, losing arguments to a person who has been dead for years and who only says what Dexter already believes. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Everything about him traces back to 2 days he spent inside a shipping container. Fact 16. Dexter was 3 years old when his mother, Laura Moser, was murdered in a shipping container at the port of Miami. She was killed with a chainsaw in front of him, along with 2 other people, and he and his older brother were left sitting in several inches of blood for 2 days before anyone found them. Harry Morgan was the detective who opened the door. He took the younger boy home and left the older one to the system. The show holds that information back and releases it gradually across the first season. Once it arrives, everything reorganizes around it. The blood slides, the plastic sheeting, the obsessive control of fluid inside a sealed room. All of it points to a child who spent 2 days inside an environment he could not clean, could not leave, and could not understand. He grew into a man who studies blood professionally and stores it privately. The origin never had to be explained, it only had to be shown. The brother left behind in that container came back with a nickname. Fact 17. The ice truck killer, the antagonist of the first season, is Brian Moser, Dexter's biological older brother. He survived the container, went through institutions, became a prosthetic specialist, and spent years searching for the sibling who was adopted into a normal house while he was not. His killing method is the exact inverse of Dexter's. He drains bodies completely and leaves them bloodless, cold, and immaculate. The reveal reframes the entire season. Every crime scene was a message. The dismembered bodies arranged carefully around Miami were an older brother trying to get his younger brother's professional attention, using the only language they share. Brian does not want to hurt Dexter. He wants a partner, a family, someone who will finally understand him. The first season is built to look like a serial killer investigation, and turns out to be a story about a man being courted by the only person alive who knows what he is. The bloodless bodies were a signature with a meaning most viewers missed on first watch. Fact 18. Brian removes every drop of blood from his victims because blood is the thing he cannot stand. Both brothers were shaped by the same 2 days in the container and responded in opposite directions. One built a career around blood and collects it in glass slides. The other empties his victims completely so that nothing is left to see. Same wound, 2 solutions, and the show never states the comparison out loud. Christian Camargo plays Brian with a warmth that makes the character deeply unsettling. He is charming, funny, patient, and completely sincere in his affection for Dexter. He kills people to make a point, and then talks about family with real feeling. That combination is the show's first demonstration of its central idea, that monstrousness and love are not opposites and can live comfortably in the same person. Brian is the version of Dexter who was never given a code, and he is not obviously worse for it. He is only louder. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The novels the show came from eventually went somewhere. Television never followed. Fact 19. Lindsay wrote 8 Dexter novels, finishing with Dexter is Dead in 2015. The show and the books share a first season and then split so completely that the two versions of the character become difficult to reconcile. In the novels, the thing Dexter calls his dark passenger is not a metaphor for compulsion. It is treated as an actual entity, something ancient that attached itself to him, with roots reaching back to an old god associated with child sacrifice. The show refused that direction entirely. Television Dexter's dark passenger is psychology, trauma, and a story he tells himself to make the urge feel like something separate from his own will. That single decision is the biggest fork between the two versions. One is supernatural horror. The other is a character study about a man who invented a passenger so he would not have to be the driver. Readers who moved from the show to the books frequently describe the transition as a shock. In the books, his stepchildren are being trained the same way he was. Fact 20. Rita's children, Aster and Cody, are ordinary kids in the show, damaged by an abusive father, but otherwise normal. In the novels, they are not. Dexter recognizes something in both of them, the same quiet wrongness Harry once spotted in him, and he begins teaching them the code. He becomes the Harry figure for a new generation, passing down the rules he was raised on. That storyline changes the meaning of the whole series. The show is about a man managing a condition he did not choose and trying to hold a family together despite it. The books are about that condition spreading through a household by instruction. Readers get to watch Dexter make the same choice Harry made, and the choice looks very different from the inside. The show's writers avoided it completely, which is why the two Dexters end in places that barely resemble each other. One of the biggest secrets of the series is revealed to his sister far earlier on the page. Fact 21. In the novels, Deborah Morgan learns what her brother is by the end of the very first book. She spends every volume afterward as a woman who knows, torn between her badge and her brother, and she survives the entire series. The show delays that revelation until the end of the 6th season, which means television Deb spends 6 years working alongside the man she is theoretically hunting without ever seeing him. That delay is one of the most debated writing choices in the show's history. 6 seasons of near misses stretch the audience's patience, because Deb is a good detective, and the story kept requiring her not to be. When the reveal finally lands, she walks into a church and sees her brother driving a knife into a man strapped to an altar. There is no room left for interpretation. The show spent 6 years building a wall between them, and then removed it in a single image, and the seasons that follow are entirely about what that image does to her. The two versions of the character end in opposite places. Deborah walks out of the novels alive. Deb does not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The sergeant who spent 2 seasons circling him was right about everything, and it destroyed him. Fact 22. James Dokes is the only person at Miami Metro who looks at Dexter and feels something wrong. Everyone else sees a polite, slightly awkward lab technician who brings donuts. Dokes, played by Eric King, sees a man whose reactions arrive half a beat late, and he never stops saying so. He is loud about it, aggressive about it, and completely correct about it, and the show punishes him for it relentlessly. His pursuit builds across 2 seasons and ends with him locked in a cage in the Everglades, framed for the murders Dexter committed, and finally killed in an explosion he had nothing to do with. He dies as the Bay Harbor butcher in the public record. The most honest cop in the building becomes the most infamous killer in Florida, and the man responsible attends the funeral. The show never allows Dokes a reprieve. He is proof that in this world, being right about Dexter is the most dangerous thing a person can be, and the audience is placed in the deeply uncomfortable position of hoping he fails. Dokes had one line that outlived the show entirely. Fact 23. Eric King delivered a two-word warning to Dexter with such force that it escaped the series completely. The line is a blunt announcement of arrival, aimed at a man who thought he was alone, and it has spent years circulating online as a reaction clip, a meme, a soundbite used by people who have never watched a full episode. It became the single most quoted moment the show produced. King has spoken about the strangeness of that afterlife. The line was not written as a catchphrase. It appears in a tense scene as a threat, and it works because of the sheer physical commitment behind it. Dokes is a former Special Forces soldier who has spent the entire season being told he is paranoid, and the delivery carries all of that pressure at once. The internet stripped away the context and kept the sound. The result is that a character who dies in Season 2 remains one of the most recognizable elements of the entire series, quoted constantly by people who could not name the season he died in. The killer identity Dokes was buried under came from where the bodies were found. Fact 24. The Bay Harbor Butcher is the name Miami Metro gives to an unknown killer after a diver discovers a submerged field of bagged body parts in the Gulf Stream off the Florida coast. Dexter had been dropping his victims in the same location for years, trusting the current to carry them out. It did not. They stacked up on the sea floor in a neat underwater graveyard directly beneath the route he used every time. The second season builds its entire tension from that error. Dexter is not hunted because a detective outsmarted him. He is exposed because the ocean did not behave the way he assumed it would. His control, which is his defining trait, turns out to have a blind spot the size of a shipping lane. The task force investigating the case sits in the same building as him, and he is assigned to help. He spends the season analyzing his own crime scenes, correcting other people's conclusions about himself, and steering an investigation away from its only correct answer. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The FBI agent brought in to catch him became one of the only people who ever came close. Fact 25. Special Agent Frank Lundy, played by Keith Carradine, arrives to lead the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force and immediately becomes the most dangerous person in the show. He is calm, patient, methodical, and completely uninterested in ego. He builds a profile that describes Dexter with unnerving accuracy, and he does it without ever raising his voice or accusing anyone. Lundy matters because he is the only pursuer who is not driven by rage. Dokes chases Dexter with fury and gets destroyed by it. Lundy simply works, and the work keeps producing results. He is also the only investigator who treats Deb as a genuine talent rather than a junior officer, which gives the character a relationship the show badly needed. Carradine plays him with such warmth that the audience is split down the middle, wanting him to succeed and knowing exactly what his success would cost. He returns in Season 4, hunting a different killer, and that decision ends him. The man who ended Lundy was never actually the one holding the gun. Fact 26. Lundy is shot on a Miami street while investigating a killer he has tracked for decades. Deb is hit in the same attack and survives. The audience assumes the shooter is the man Lundy was chasing. The truth is quieter and stranger. The shots were fired by Christine Hill, a journalist who had been building a relationship with Detective Joey Quinn, specifically to stay near the investigation. Christine is Arthur Mitchell's daughter, and she killed Lundy to protect a father who does not love her and barely acknowledges her. Her entire arc is a study in what proximity to a monster does to a child who was not chosen as a victim, but was raised inside the same house. She commits murder for a man who, when she finally confesses to him, offers her nothing at all. The show gives her a small number of scenes and uses them to demonstrate that Arthur Mitchell's damage extends far past the people he personally killed. Her father is the reason the show's 4th season is still considered its peak. Fact 27. John Lithgow played Arthur Mitchell, known as the Trinity Killer, and won the Emmy for Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series for the role in 2010. Trinity had been killing for 30 years without ever being caught, moving city to city, holding down a job as a deacon and a volunteer with a charity that builds houses for families in need. His neighbors describe him as gentle. His family describes him differently. The casting worked because of everything Lithgow had done before. He was known for warmth and comedy, for a goofy alien on a sitcom, for characters audiences relaxed around. That familiarity is weaponized. When Arthur smiles at his wife, the audience wants to trust it, and then watches him terrorize his own children minutes later. Lithgow has said the role disturbed him and that he was reluctant to take it. His performance is regularly named among the finest villain turns in television history, and the season built around him is the one nearly every viewer points to as the show's high point. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. His killing cycle is a reenactment of a single afternoon from his childhood. Fact 28. Trinity kills in a fixed sequence, and each killing recreates a piece of a family catastrophe he lived through as a boy. A young woman dies in a bathtub, echoing the death of his sister Vera, who bled to death after a fall in the bathroom that Arthur accidentally caused. A mother dies falling from a height, echoing his own mother's suicide. A father dies bludgeoned, echoing his own father. He rebuilds the worst day of his life over and over, using strangers as replacement parts. He also abducts a child in each cycle and kills the boy in wet concrete, which stands in for the version of himself who was never allowed to grow up. The whole pattern is an attempt to finish something unfinishable. It is also the darkest possible mirror of Dexter, who is likewise reconstructing a childhood event on repeat inside a sealed plastic room. The show places the two men side by side for a season and lets the audience notice the resemblance without ever pointing at it. The last thing Trinity does in the series is not a murder he commits himself. Fact 29. Dexter kills Arthur Mitchell in the season 4 finale, drives home satisfied, and finds his wife Rita dead in the bathtub with their infant son sitting on the floor in her blood. Trinity had gone to the house before Dexter caught him. The final kill of his cycle was already complete, and Dexter had spent the episode believing he had won. The image is a direct reproduction of Dexter's own origin. A small child sitting in blood, alone, in a room he cannot leave, exactly as Dexter sat in the shipping container at the age of 3. The show waited 4 full seasons to close that circle, and closed it in the last 30 seconds of an episode with almost no dialogue. Harrison is now on the same path his father was placed on, created by the same mechanism, and the man responsible for stopping that mechanism is the one who brought Trinity into his life. The finale is widely regarded as the most effective ending the series ever produced. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The actress playing Rita had almost no warning that her character was finished. Fact 30. Julie Benz played Rita Bennett for 4 seasons, taking a character who began as a nervous, damaged woman escaping an abusive marriage and building her into the emotional anchor of the entire show. Her death was kept under very tight control during production. Cast and crew have described the secrecy around that finale as unusual, even by the standards of a show that guarded its twists carefully. Benz has spoken publicly about learning the news and about the difficulty of the final scenes, and the reaction from viewers was immediate and enormous. Rita was the only character in Dexter's life who received his full attempt at ordinary human warmth. Killing her removed the possibility of the life he had been quietly building toward, and every season afterward is shaped by that removal. The show has never fully recovered its footing in the eyes of many viewers, which is a strange kind of compliment to a character who is often written as the least dangerous person on screen. The baby left in that bathroom carries his grandfather's name for a reason. Fact 31. Harrison Morgan is named after Harry Morgan, the man who taught Dexter how to kill without being caught. Dexter chose that name for his son deliberately, framing it as a tribute to the father who saved him. Viewed from any other angle, he named his child after the person who decided a small boy could not be fixed and should be pointed at other people instead. The name becomes heavier as the series continues. Harrison is found sitting in his mother's blood at the same age Dexter was in the container, then grows up, carrying urges his father recognizes instantly. By the time the story reaches its later chapters, the boy is doing precisely what the name predicted. Every generation in this family passes down the same inheritance under the cover of love. Harry did it to Dexter, Dexter does it to Harrison, and each of them believes he is protecting the child rather than shaping him. The name is the show's quietest piece of foreshadowing, and it is planted in Season 4. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show's most controversial twist was hiding in plain sight for 8 episodes. Fact 32. Season 6 introduces the Doomsday Killer, a pair of men staging elaborate murder tableau based on the Book of Revelation. One is Travis Marshall, played by Colin Hanks. The other is Professor James Geller, played by Edward James Olmos, a religious studies academic who directs the killings and drives Travis forward. Midway through the season, the show reveals that Geller has been dead the entire time, stored in a freezer, and that Travis has been talking to a figure who exists only in his own head. The twist divided the audience sharply. Some viewers had spotted it early, noting that Geller never interacts with anyone except Travis. Others felt it repeated a device the show had already used twice, since Dexter talks to a dead Harry and had previously imagined a version of his brother. The show's defenders point out that this is exactly the point. Travis has a projected partner giving him instructions, which makes him a mirror of the protagonist. The season is asking the audience to consider that Dexter's dark passenger is no more real than Geller is. The most respected actor in that storyline was playing a corpse for most of it. Fact 33. Edward James Olmos spent the majority of Season 6 performing a character who had been dead since before that season began. Every scene of Geller giving orders, Geller quoting scripture, Geller losing patience with his disciple, is a scene of Travis Marshall arguing with himself in the voice of a man he admired and murdered. Olmos had to play the character as both a real memory and a fabricated authority figure at once. That structure produces an odd viewing experience on a rewatch. Every Geller scene changes meaning completely. His cruelty becomes Travis's self-loathing. His certainty becomes Travis's need for permission. It is the same trick the show plays with Harry, scaled up and pushed into the foreground, and the reason it upset so many viewers is that it worked too well as a mirror. Watching a man take orders from someone who is not there is uncomfortable, specifically because the audience has been doing exactly that alongside Dexter for 6 seasons without objecting. One of the show's most famous seasons was built around a woman who was never supposed to survive her first episode. Fact 34, Season 5, brings in Lumen Pierce, played by Julia Stiles, a woman Dexter finds alive at a crime scene after a group of men have spent weeks torturing her and killing others like her. She becomes the only person in the entire series who watches him kill, understands exactly what he is, and does not run, judge, or attempt to fix him. She simply joins. The season works because it removes Dexter's loneliness for a stretch of episodes and shows what he might look like with a genuine partner. Stiles was nominated for a Golden Globe and an Emmy for the role. The relationship also carries a built-in expiry date, and both characters know it. Lumen's need to kill fades once her own attackers are dead, because her urge was created by a specific event rather than carried since childhood. Dexter's does not fade. The season ends with her leaving, and the reason she leaves is the cruelest thing the show ever tells him. She got better. He is not sick in a way that heals. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The woman he falls for 2 seasons later is the first person who never asks him to change. Fact 35. Hannah McKay, played by Yvonne Strahovski, arrives in Season 7 as a poisoner and former accomplice to a spree killer. Dexter investigates her, corners her, prepares to kill her, and instead begins a relationship with her that lasts through the end of the series. She is the only romantic partner who knows everything from the beginning and treats none of it as a problem to solve. That acceptance is what makes her dangerous to the story. Rita represented a normal life Dexter could not have. Lumen represented a partner whose need was temporary. Hannah represents something the show had avoided for 6 years, which is the possibility that Dexter could simply be happy. Every structure in the series depends on him being unable to have that. The final season spends most of its running time deciding what to do about her, and the answer it reaches has been argued about by viewers ever since. The actors playing brother and sister were married in real life while filming. Fact 36. Michael C. Hall and Jennifer Carpenter met on Dexter, married in 2008, and divorced in 2011. They continued playing siblings for the remainder of the series, including through storylines that took the relationship between Dexter and Deb into painful territory. Both have spoken about it with unusual calm, describing a working relationship that survived the personal one ending. The overlap creates a strange layer for anyone watching with that knowledge. The 7th season in particular puts the two characters through emotional scenes of enormous intensity, filmed after the marriage had already ended. Carpenter has described the professional bond between them as separate from everything else, and the performances support that. Deb and Dexter remain the emotional center of the entire show, and the chemistry between the two actors never wavers across 8 seasons, regardless of what was happening away from set. One of them was fighting a serious illness through an entire season without the audience knowing. Fact 37, Michael C. Hall was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma during production of the 4th season. He continued working through treatment, and the show he was carrying at the time became the most acclaimed run of episodes in its history. He announced the diagnosis publicly after entering remission and appeared at the 2010 Golden Globes wearing a knit cap after chemotherapy. The timing is difficult to process. Season 4 is the Trinity season, the one built around mortality, family, and a man realizing that the life he has assembled is far more fragile than he assumed. Hall was performing scenes about a father contemplating the collapse of everything he loves while receiving cancer treatment between shooting days. He has spoken about the experience without drama, describing the work as something that helped rather than hindered. He won a Golden Globe for the role that year, and the ovation he received had a great deal to do with what the room knew. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The detective standing beside him for 8 seasons was played by a man who used to do the job for real. Fact 38, David Zayas, who plays Angel Batista, served as a New York City police officer for around 15 years before turning to acting full-time. He worked in the Bronx, and he brought that experience directly into a role that requires him to move through crime scenes, interviews, and squad rooms, as though they are ordinary workplaces rather than dramatic sets. That background shows in small, unglamorous ways. Batista is the only character in Miami Metro who consistently behaves like an actual working detective, patient with paperwork, careful with witnesses, warm with colleagues. Zayas has said the transition into acting began while he was still on the force, taking classes and performing on stage in his own time. He became one of the very few actors to appear across the original series, New Blood, and the sequel that followed, which makes Batista the single longest-running presence in the franchise, besides Dexter himself and the ghost of his father. The lab technician everyone remembers as comic relief has a much darker function in the story. Fact 39. Vince Masuka, played by C.S. Lee, exists in the show as the crude joke machine of the forensics department. He is inappropriate, relentless, and frequently the only person in a room lightening the atmosphere. His purpose in the structure of the show is more useful than the jokes suggest. He is the noise that covers Dexter's silence. In an office containing an actual serial killer, Masuka is the person everyone finds strange. He absorbs the discomfort that would otherwise land on the quiet man in the corner. Every conversation about how weird the lab is becomes a conversation about Masuka, and Dexter disappears into the background of it. The show also gives him a genuine arc in the later seasons when a daughter he never knew about arrives, and the character responds with an awkward, sincere attempt at being a father. It is a small piece of writing that reveals the crude persona was always a performance too, running in the same building as a much larger one. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. His sister was written to swear more than almost anyone in television history. Fact 40. Deborah Morgan's language became a defining feature of the character almost immediately. Jennifer Carpenter delivers profanity at a volume and frequency that turned into a running joke among viewers and a genuine talking point in reviews, with fans counting her totals episode by episode. She is regularly cited in discussions of the most foul-mouthed characters ever written for American television. The writing choice is doing something specific. Deb works in a department full of men who do not take her seriously, in the shadow of a legendary father, chasing a promotion that keeps getting handed to other people. The language is armor. It is also the clearest possible contrast with her brother, who never raises his voice and never loses control of a single word. She screams everything she feels. He says almost nothing and means almost none of it. Two children raised by the same man, in the same house, developing opposite systems for surviving him. The man who raised them both hid a secret that undoes his entire reputation. Fact 41. Harry Morgan is presented for 3 seasons as a decent man who made an impossible choice and did his best with it. The show then dismantles him piece by piece. He had an affair with Laura Moser, Dexter's biological mother, while she worked as his confidential informant. His handling of her contributed directly to her death in the container. He knew about the shipping container before he ever adopted the boy who survived it. The final piece is the worst. Harry watched Dexter kill for the first time and could not live with what he had built, and he took his own life afterward. The version Dexter grew up with, a father who died of heart problems, was a story constructed by other people. The code Dexter follows was written by a man who abandoned the project the moment he saw it working. Every rule Dexter obeys comes from someone who looked at the results and decided he could not stay in the world where they existed. Dexter spends the entire series taking instruction from a person who quit. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The code did not come from Harry alone. Fact 42. Season 8 introduces Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist who worked with Miami Metro decades earlier, and who reveals that she is the person who actually designed the code. Harry brought her a child he did not understand. She studied him, told Harry the boy could not be cured, and helped construct a set of rules that would channel the behavior rather than attempt to stop it. She refers to Dexter as her spiritual son. Her arrival rewrites the moral foundation of the entire series. Dexter had spent 7 years believing the code came from a father's love, a desperate improvisation by a man protecting his child. It was actually a clinical experiment, designed by a professional who found him fascinating, and Harry was the delivery mechanism. Vogel treats his life as a case study she has been following since childhood. The most personal thing about Dexter, the only inheritance he trusted, turns out to have been research, and he learns this in the final year of his life as a free man. Her own son turned out to be the last serial killer Dexter ever hunted in Miami. Fact 43. Vogel's son, Oliver Saxon, operates as the brain surgeon, removing sections of brain tissue from his victims and posting the results back to his mother. He is the product of the same theories she used to shape Dexter, applied to her own child and abandoned when it failed. He kills Vogel in front of Dexter, which makes him the third parent figure Dexter loses inside the show's running time. Saxon is the most direct comparison the series ever draws. He is what Dexter would have been without Harry, without rules, without a job that gives him access to guilt and evidence. Vogel built a functioning monster out of a stranger's child, and a failed one out of her own, and the show never lets her explain why. Her death in the final season removes the last person alive who understood what Dexter is from the outside. After she is gone, there is nobody left to describe him accurately, which is a form of loneliness the show has been building toward since the first episode. The moment his sister pulls a trigger is the moment she stops being able to live with herself. Fact 44. At the end of Season 7, Maria LaGuardia has assembled enough evidence to arrest Dexter for the Bay Harbor butcher murders. She has never given up on her belief that Dokes was innocent, and she is correct. She lures Dexter into a trap at a shipping container, and Deb arrives holding a gun, forced to choose between her captain and her brother. She shoots LaGuardia. That single act destroys her. Deb has spent her entire adult life defining herself as a good cop, and she kills an innocent woman to protect a serial killer. Season 8 is the aftermath of that decision, and Jennifer Carpenter plays it as a slow, grinding collapse. The show is often criticized for its later seasons, but the through line it builds from that gunshot is brutal. Deb is the person Dexter loves most, and proximity to him takes everything from her in stages, ending with her career, her sense of self, and eventually her life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The way he disposes of her body is the darkest choice in the entire series. Fact 45: Deb is shot in the final season, suffers a stroke while recovering, and is left with no brain function. Dexter removes her from life support himself. Then he carries her body out of the hospital during a hurricane, takes her onto his boat, and drops her into the ocean, exactly as he has done with dozens of victims across 8 seasons. That choice is presented as an act of love, a brother returning his sister to the water. It also means the person he loved most in the world receives the same disposal as the people he hunted. He uses the same boat, the same route, the same water. The show does not comment on it. Nobody in the story ever says out loud that Dexter has just treated his sister like a victim. It is left sitting there for the audience to notice, and it is the clearest evidence the series ever offers that the man does not actually have a separate mode for the people he loves. He only has one set of hands. What he does next is the reason people still argue about this show more than a decade later. Fact 46. The series finale sends Dexter into the hurricane, steers his boat into the storm, and appears to kill him. The wreckage is found. He is declared dead. The final scene then reveals him alive in the Pacific Northwest, working as a lumberjack, living alone in a cabin, bearded and silent. He looks directly into the camera, and the show ends. The response was immediate and enormous. It is regularly named in lists of the worst series finales ever produced, and it damaged the reputation of the entire show retroactively. Defenders argue the ending is thematically correct, that Dexter denies himself both death and connection, and is sentenced to exist without either. Critics argue that the execution was flat, the pacing rushed, and the final image accidentally funny rather than devastating. What is not in dispute is the scale of the disappointment. A show that had been one of the most watched dramas on cable ended with the audience actively angry. The original showrunner had a completely different ending planned. Fact 47. Clyde Phillips ran Dexter for the first 4 seasons, the run most viewers consider its best, and left before the 5th. He has since described the ending he would have written, and it is nothing like the one that aired. In his version, Dexter is captured and executed. The final sequence shows him on the table as the drugs are administered, and the camera pulls back to reveal the witnesses watching through the glass. The gallery is filled with the dead. Every person whose life ended because of him, the ones he strapped to a table, and the ones who simply stood too close, all of them watching as the sentence is carried out. Phillips has described it as the moment where the audience finally sees the scale of what this man has done, laid out as faces in a room. He has repeated the description in multiple interviews across the years, and it circulates constantly among fans as the ending that should have happened. Phillips later returned to the franchise and got to write 2 more endings for the character, which is an unusual second chance in television. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 4 different people ran the show, and the seams are visible in every season. Fact 48. Dexter cycled through showrunners in a way very few long-running dramas do. James Manos Jr. developed the pilot and departed. Clyde Phillips ran seasons 1 through 4. Chip Johannesson took season 5. Scott Buck took seasons 6, 7, and 8. Each transition produced a noticeable change in tone, pacing, and the amount of interest the show had in its own continuity. The pattern maps neatly onto the way audiences rate the seasons. The Phillips run is the one people rewatch. The later years are where the arguments start. Buck in particular took the heat for the finale, and the criticism followed him to later projects. What the churn reveals is that Dexter never had a single guiding vision carried from beginning to end. It was a story handed between caretakers, each of whom inherited a character that had already been pushed further than the previous plan allowed. The ending the show reached was not the ending anybody originally designed. It was the ending that was left available. The finale was still the most watched episode the network had ever aired. Fact 49. Whatever the audience thought of the last episode, they watched it. The series finale drew the largest audience in Showtime's history at the time, with figures reported around 2.8 million viewers for the initial airing. Dexter had grown steadily across its run and finished as the network's biggest drama, a genuine mainstream hit built on a premise that sounded unairable when it was first pitched. That combination is one of the strangest results in modern television. The show ended with record numbers and a furious audience simultaneously. Anger and viewership arrived together, which is only possible when a large number of people have invested years in something and feel the ending owed them a debt it did not pay. The commercial success is also the reason the franchise refused to stay dead. A property that ends badly, but ends huge, is a property somebody will eventually reopen, and that is precisely what happened 8 years later. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A version of the show once aired on network television, with the violence removed. Fact 50. During the writers' strike that shut down American television production in 2007 and 2008, CBS was left with a schedule full of holes and no new scripted content to fill them. The network aired an edited version of Dexter's first season, cutting profanity and trimming violence to meet broadcast standards. It was one of the few times a premium cable drama about a serial killer appeared on free network television in the middle of the evening. The move drew objections from parents' groups and from viewers who felt a show about a murderer had no business on a broadcast schedule. It also introduced the series to a far larger audience than Showtime could reach on its own, and the ratings were solid. The edited version is a curiosity now, a stripped-down Dexter with the edges filed off, and it remains a useful demonstration of how much of the show survives, even when the graphic content is removed. The unease was never coming from the blood. The complaints about the show reached far past a few edited episodes. Fact 51. The Parents Television Council campaigned against Dexter repeatedly, arguing that a series built around a sympathetic murderer normalized violence, and that the character's popularity was a cultural problem rather than a storytelling achievement. The organization targeted the CBS broadcast especially hard and continued to name the show in its reports for years afterward. Showtime's response was consistent throughout. The show never presents Dexter as a hero to imitate, and every season punishes him for the life he has chosen by removing another person he loves. The counter-argument from critics of the show was that intent does not control reception, and that a large section of the audience was cheering rather than recoiling. Both sides were describing something real. The series generated genuine affection for its lead, in a way few anti-hero dramas have managed, partly because the narration invites the viewer to sit inside his reasoning. Whether that constitutes a warning or an endorsement depends entirely on who is watching, and the show has never settled the question for anybody. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. At least 2 real criminal cases were connected to the show in court. Fact 52. The most widely reported case involved Mark Twitchell, a Canadian filmmaker convicted of murder in Edmonton, whose writings referenced Dexter directly, and who was described in press coverage as having modeled aspects of his behavior on the character. The case attracted international attention and produced a wave of headlines linking the show to a real killing. A separate case in Indiana involved a teenager named Andrew Conley, who told investigators he had been influenced by the series after murdering his younger brother. Both cases were used by critics as evidence that the show carried real-world consequences, and both were used by defenders as evidence of nothing, since violent people have cited books, films, and songs for as long as those things have existed. Researchers who study media effects have generally landed on the second position. Fiction does not manufacture killers. What these cases do demonstrate is that Dexter provided a ready-made vocabulary for people who wanted one, a way of describing an urge that already existed. The show gave a name to something, and a small number of people picked the name up. The music underneath every episode was written by a composer who was doing something very unusual. Fact 53. Daniel Licht scored the series, taking over from Rolf Kent, who wrote the main theme. Licht built the sound of Dexter out of instruments that do not belong together, layering steel drums and tropical percussion against low, uneasy tones, so that the score is simultaneously sunny and wrong. The music is doing the same job as the Miami setting, presenting brightness with something rotten underneath. He avoided the standard thriller approach almost entirely. There are very few stabbing strings or crashing chords. Instead, the score often becomes quiet and almost pleasant during the most disturbing scenes, which leaves the audience without the usual cues that tell them how to feel. That absence is deliberate, and it is a major reason the show feels different from other crime dramas of its era. Licht died in 2017, and his work on the series is regularly cited as one of the most distinctive television scores of the decade. The music is one of the few elements of Dexter that no critic has ever argued about. The lead actor is also a working musician who fronts his own band. Fact 54. Michael C. Hall came from theater before television and never left it. He has performed on Broadway as the MC in Cabaret and in the title role of Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and he originated the lead role in Lazarus, the stage musical David Bowie wrote in the final period of his life. Hall worked directly with Bowie on that production shortly before his death. He also fronts a band, performing under the name Princess Goes, releasing albums and touring. The music is dark, synth-driven and theatrical, and it exists entirely separately from his television career. Audiences who know him only as a bloodspatter analyst in a beige, short-sleeved shirt are frequently startled by footage of him performing on stage. The overlap with the character is difficult to miss. Hall has spent his career playing men who conceal, hold still, and reveal nothing, and spends his other life on a stage doing the opposite in front of a crowd. Whatever else the role required, restraint was clearly a decision rather than a limitation. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A comic book version of the character exists inside the show itself. Fact 55. In the second season, as the city becomes fascinated with the unknown killer dumping bodies into the Gulf Stream, Masuka becomes obsessed with a fan-created comic book character called the Dark Defender, a masked vigilante based on the Bay Harbor Butcher. Miami turns its serial killer into a folk hero, and merchandise appears before the police have any idea who they are chasing. The joke lands on two levels at once. Inside the story, Dexter watches strangers celebrate him for the one thing he has hidden his entire life, and he finds the attention intolerable rather than flattering. Outside the story, the show is looking directly at its own audience. Viewers were buying shirts and posters of a fictional murderer while the series was still airing, doing exactly what the fictional citizens of Miami are shown doing. Dexter briefly imagines himself as the Dark Defender in a stylized comic book sequence, and it is one of the only moments in 8 seasons where the show allows him a heroic self-image. He rejects it immediately. The show never tells the audience how many people he actually kills. Fact 56. There is no official body count for Dexter Morgan. The series never provides a total, and the numbers circulated by fans vary widely, depending on whether the count includes off-screen kills, victims mentioned in dialogue, people killed indirectly, and the enormous ambiguity of everything that happened before the first episode. Estimates commonly land somewhere between 100 and 140, and none of them can be confirmed. The vagueness is a choice. Early narration establishes that Dexter has been killing for years before the audience arrives, with a routine already fully developed, which means the pilot opens in the middle of a career. Attaching a firm number would make him countable, and countable is manageable. The show is more interested in the fact that he does not keep a running total himself. He keeps slides, which is a physical archive with no ledger attached. He knows the collection is large. He has never appeared to sit down and count it, and a man who avoids counting is telling the audience something about what he would rather not know. The count also depends on which version of the character is being tallied. The prequel adds kills from a period the original series only referred to in passing. The revival adds a decade of abstinence followed by a rapid return. The sequel keeps going. Any number a viewer settles on is a snapshot of a career that has been extended twice by writers who were not finished with him. His hunting method depends entirely on his access to a police database. Fact 57. Dexter selects victims by reading police files. He works inside Miami Metro. He has clearance, and he spends his days looking at cases that fell apart, suspects who walked, and evidence that was never enough. The code requires certainty of guilt, and the only reason he can achieve that certainty is that he is standing inside the building where the proof is stored. This makes his entire operation dependent on the institution he is quietly betraying. Without the badge, he is a man with a knife and no targets. The police give him the names, the addresses, the forensic detail, and the confidence, and in return, he removes the people their own system failed to hold. The show never resolves what that arrangement means. Dexter is either a parasite feeding on the department or its most effective employee, and the answer changes depending on which season is being watched. What is consistent is that his entire moral framework requires him to trust police paperwork completely, which is a strange foundation for a man who believes in almost nothing else. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. He photographs every victim before he kills them, and the reason is not evidence. Fact 58. The ritual is fixed. Dexter tapes photographs of the victim's own victims around the room, wakes the man on the table, and forces him to look at them. He explains what the person did and why they are there. Only then does the killing begin. He calls this necessary, part of the code, a confirmation of guilt. Nothing about it is necessary. He has already established guilt before the room is built. The display serves no practical purpose whatsoever, and it adds enormous risk by extending the time spent with a living victim. The photographs exist because Dexter requires an audience for his justification, and the only available audience is the man about to die. That need is the crack running through the entire character. He insists he feels nothing, that he is empty, that the code is simply a leash. Then he spends the most dangerous minutes of every kill delivering a speech nobody will ever repeat to a person who will not survive to remember it because some part of him cannot proceed without being told he is right. His victims are chosen by a rule that quietly excuses everything he does. Fact 59. The code states that Dexter kills only those who have killed and escaped justice. On paper, it reads like a filter designed to protect the innocent. In practice, it does something else entirely. It guarantees that every person he kills is someone the audience will not mourn, which means the show can run for years without ever asking the viewer to feel uncomfortable about a specific death. The rule also gives Dexter a permanent supply. Miami in this series produces killers at an extraordinary rate, and every one of them is guilty in a way that requires no debate. The world has been arranged around the code so that the code always works. When the show breaks that arrangement, the results are severe. Dexter kills an innocent man in the 4th season by mistake, and the moment is treated as a catastrophe that stays with him. He kills people outside the code to protect himself on several occasions, and each of those killings poisons the season it appears in. The rule is not protecting his victims. It is protecting his ability to keep believing he is not simply a murderer. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show gave him a partner in Season 3 who wanted to do it all in the open. Fact 60. Miguel Prado, played by Jimmy Smits, is an assistant district attorney who discovers what Dexter is and reacts with enthusiasm rather than horror. He wants to help. He wants to be taught. For the only time in the series, Dexter takes on a student, and the season becomes a study of what happens when the code leaves his control. Prado turns out to be everything Dexter fears about himself without the rules. He kills for convenience, for grudges, for political advantage, and he uses the language of justice while doing it. The lesson the season delivers is that the code is not a moral position at all. It is a restraint, and it only functions on someone who wants to be restrained. Smits brings a warmth and charisma to the role that makes the betrayal hurt. Dexter has almost never had a friend, and Prado is the closest thing to one he ever gets. The season ends with the friendship on a table under plastic, and with Dexter understanding that the thing he wanted most, being known and accepted, is the thing most likely to destroy him. The woman who nearly destroyed him 2 seasons earlier wanted exactly the same thing. Fact 61. Leela West, played by Jaime Murray, arrives in Season 2 as a sponsor from a support group Dexter joins while pretending to have an addiction. She recognizes something in him almost immediately and becomes fascinated by it. She is the first person in the series to look at Dexter and see the truth without any evidence at all, working entirely on instinct. What makes Leela dangerous is that she does not want to expose him or fix him. She wants to be the only person who knows. Her obsession escalates until she is willing to burn a building down and kill people to keep his attention, and she is ultimately responsible for the death of Dokes. The character is often described as the least popular element of Season 2, and that reaction is worth examining. Lila is a woman doing to Dexter roughly what he does to everyone else in his life, studying, manipulating, and treating another person as a resource. She is the show holding a mirror up to its own protagonist, and audiences found the reflection irritating rather than sympathetic. Dexter kills her in Paris, and the show never mentions her again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One of the show's most memorable villains was played by an actor who died a few years later. Fact 62, Ray Stevenson played Isaac Serko in Season 7, the head of a Ukrainian crime organization who comes to Miami to avenge the death of a man he loved. Dexter killed that man, and Serko spends the season hunting him with a patience and dignity that puts him closer to a tragic figure than a gangster. The character works because his grief is real and entirely justified. He is a killer pursuing another killer for exactly the reason Dexter would pursue someone. The two men eventually share scenes of genuine understanding, and Serko is one of the very few people who ever tells Dexter the truth about himself in plain language, pointing out that he loves the people around him, whatever he claims otherwise. Stevenson brought an enormous physical presence and a surprising gentleness to the role, and it is regularly named among the strongest performances in the later seasons. He died in 2023 while working on another production, and the tributes that followed included a large number from Dexter viewers who had never forgotten him. The show killed off the one character who kept the entire department honest. Fact 63, Maria LaGuerta, played by Lauren Velez, is written across most of the series as an obstacle. She is political, ambitious, focused on her own advancement, and frequently placed in opposition to characters the audience likes. Then the 7th season reveals that she has been right about the single most important thing in the show's history. She never accepted that James Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. She kept the file open in her own time, followed the evidence honestly, and reached the correct conclusion by ordinary police work. She does this while everyone around her has moved on, and she does it for a colleague who was rude to her and who is already dead and buried in disgrace. That loyalty gets her killed. The audience spends 6 seasons being encouraged to find her tiresome, and then watches her die for being the only person in the building who refused to close a case she knew was wrong. The show does not soften it. The last honest investigation in Miami Metro ends with a bullet fired by a detective protecting her brother. One relationship in his life outranks every romance the show ever gave him. Fact 64. Across 8 seasons, Dexter has a wife, several serious relationships, and a son. None of them occupy the position his sister does. Every major turning point in the series is measured by what it costs Deb. Every ending the show reaches, including the one after it returned, is built around her. Their relationship works because it contains the only unfaked thing in his life. Dexter performs everything, constantly, with everyone. With Deb, the performance keeps slipping because she has known him since childhood, and the script he uses on other people has never worked on her. She is the only person who can interrupt his narration. The show also makes her the price. Everyone else Dexter loses is taken by an outside force. Deb is destroyed by proximity alone, worn down over years by the simple fact of being his sister. Her decline is the most sustained piece of long-form writing in the entire series, and every stage of it can be traced to something her brother chose to do. Whatever else the show is about, it is a story about a brother and a sister. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 8 years after the finale, the show came back specifically to fix its ending. Fact 65. Dexter, New Blood premiered in 2021. 10 episodes set a decade after the original series ended. Clyde Phillips, the showrunner from the first 4 seasons, returned to write it, and the entire project existed because the finale had left the audience unsatisfied in a way that never faded. Very few shows are revived to correct a single episode. The revival relocates the character to Iron Lake, a small town in upstate New York buried in snow, which is the visual opposite of Miami in every possible direction. Bright heat becomes white cold. Crowds become isolation. The man who hid inside a city of millions now lives in a place where everybody knows his name and his coffee order. Michael C. Hall returned, James Remar returned, and the production carried the weight of an audience that had been waiting almost a decade to be given a better goodbye. The ratings were strong, the reviews were largely positive, and the ending it delivered proved to be even more divisive than the one it was designed to replace. The false name he lives under is a tribute to the man who invented him. Fact 66. In Iron Lake, Dexter Morgan is living as Jim Lindsay, a quiet employee at a hunting and fishing supply store. The surname belongs to Jeff Lindsay, the novelist who created the character and whose books the entire franchise grew out of. It is a small acknowledgement buried in the fabric of the revival, visible only to people who know where the story started. The choice of profession is equally pointed. Dexter now sells hunting equipment, spends his days handing knives and rifles to strangers, and has told himself he has stopped. The show places him inside the exact environment his urge would find most useful, and asks the audience to believe he is managing. He is not. The first episode establishes that he has gone 10 years without killing, and that the discipline is failing, and the entire revival is built on how quickly the old routine reassembles itself once the first opportunity arrives. The name on his shirt says he is somebody else. Nothing else about him has changed at all. The voice guiding him in that revival is not his father's. Fact 67. In the original series, the figure standing in Dexter's kill rooms offering advice is Harry. In New Blood, Harry is gone, and Deb has taken his place. Jennifer Carpenter returns as an internal presence only Dexter can see, and the change transforms the function entirely. Harry was an instructor. He gave rules, corrected mistakes, and spoke with the authority of a father. Deb is not there to guide anybody. She is furious. She insults him, accuses him, tells him what he actually is, and refuses every excuse he offers. The projected version of his sister exists to attack him in a way the projected version of his father never did. Since both figures are constructed inside his own head, the shift is a report on his state of mind. He has replaced the voice that gave him permission with the voice that holds him responsible. 10 years alone in the snow have moved his internal father figure from justification to prosecution, and he is losing every argument to a woman he buried at sea. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The killer he hunts in Iron Lake keeps his victims in a way nobody expected. Fact 68. Kurt Caldwell, played by Clancy Brown, is the most respected man in Iron Lake. He owns the truck stop, funds local causes, and is described by everyone as the person who helps young people when nobody else will. He is also abducting young women, killing them, and preserving their bodies in a hidden cabin, arranged as a permanent private collection. Brown plays the character with genuine paternal warmth, which is what makes him work. Caldwell means what he says about caring for the town. Both things are true at once, and the show refuses to separate them. The parallel to Dexter is deliberate and close. Both men are pillars of a community, both keep trophies, and both have a son they are failing in different directions. Where Trinity mirrored Dexter's origins, Caldwell mirrors what he has become, an older man managing a double life so successfully that the people around him would never believe the accusation. The revival puts them in the same small town and lets the audience watch two versions of the same arrangement collide. The person who finally stops Dexter is the one he spent his whole life trying to protect. Fact 69. New Blood ends with Harrison Morgan, played by Jack Alcott, shooting his father. Dexter has just murdered a police officer to escape custody, has run out of justifications, and asks his son to do it. Harrison fires, and Dexter dies in the snow. The scene is designed to answer the question the original finale refused. Dexter does not escape into anonymity. He does not get a quiet exile. He is killed by his own child, using the reasoning his own family invented. which makes it the code operating correctly for the first and last time. Harrison kills someone who has killed and escaped justice. Reaction was split violently. Some viewers found it the ending the character had earned. Others found it rushed, arguing that the show spent 10 episodes building a father and son relationship and then destroyed it in a few minutes. What nobody expected was that this ending would prove no more final than the previous one, because within a few years, the character was walking again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The prequel that followed put a completely different actor inside his skin. Fact 70 Dexter, Original Sin, premiered in December 2024, a 10-episode prequel set in Miami in 1991, following a young Dexter beginning his internship at Miami Metro and taking his first steps under Harry's guidance. Patrick Gibson plays the younger Dexter. Christian Slater plays Harry. Molly Brown plays a teenage Deb. The most interesting production choice is that Michael C. Hall still narrates. The internal voice is the one the audience has listened to for 18 years, laid over the face of a different actor. That decision solves an enormous problem, because the narration is the character. Replacing the voice would have broken the connection completely. Clyde Phillips created the prequel as well, giving him a hand in the beginning, the original run, the first revival, and everything after. The series drew strong reviews for its casting and its recreation of early 90s Miami, alongside criticism from long-term viewers who spotted contradictions with backstory the original show had already established. It was renewed and then canceled before a second season was produced. The prequel also cast a familiar face as the woman whose death started everything. Fact 71, Original Sin, fills in the events the original series only ever described. Laura Moser appears as a living person rather than a memory, played by Brittany Allen, working as an informant for Harry and caught inside a drug operation that ends with the shipping container. Santos Jimenez, the man who swung the chainsaw, appears as a character rather than a name in a file. The prequel also shows the older brother. Brian Moser exists in Original Sin as a child, present in the container, then separated from Dexter and placed into a system that never releases him properly. The original series delivered that history in fragments across several seasons. The prequel stages it directly. Sarah Michelle Gellar joined the cast as Tanya Martin, the forensics chief supervising the young intern, and Patrick Dempsey played Captain Aaron Spencer, a Miami Metro veteran with a long history alongside Harry. The show is stacked with recognizable faces, performing a version of a story the audience already knows the ending of, which is a difficult trick, and reviewers generally agreed it worked better than expected. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The prequel was renewed and then canceled before anything was filmed. Fact 72 Showtime renewed Dexter, Original Sin, for a second season after the first finished airing in February 2025. The renewal was announced publicly, the cast was expected back, and the story had been left at a clear starting point, with Deb entering Miami Metro and Dexter fully committed to the code. The second season never happened. The renewal was reversed later in 2025 during a period of upheaval at the parent company, and the prequel ended after 10 episodes. Fans organized campaigns to reverse the decision, which is now a standard response to any cancellation, and the decision held. The result is that Original Sin exists as a single closed chapter that ends mid-sentence. It is one of the stranger outcomes in the franchise, a prequel to a story everybody knows, canceled before it could reach the events it was building toward. The Dexter universe has now produced an original series with a hated ending, a revival with a divisive ending, and a prequel with no ending at all, and it kept going anyway. The character everyone watched die in the snow came back 3 years later. Fact 73 Dexter, Resurrection premiered in July 2025, developed once again by Clyde Phillips, with Michael C. Hall returning in the lead. The premise is exactly what the title promises. Dexter survived the gunshot in Iron Lake, and the series picks up with him alive, recovering, and traveling to New York City in search of his son. The reversal was met with a mixture of delight and disbelief. A character had been killed off in a revival specifically designed to give him a definitive ending, and the franchise simply undid it. Whatever the artistic argument, the audience response was strong, and Resurrection drew some of the warmest reviews the property had received since its earliest seasons. The relocation matters as much as the survival. Miami was heat and light. Iron Lake was snow and isolation. New York is a place where a man can be surrounded by millions of people and remain completely anonymous, which returns Dexter to the environment he functions best in, while stripping away every institutional advantage he used to have. The new series surrounded him with the most famous cast the franchise ever assembled. Fact 74. Resurrection brought in Peter Dinklage as Leon Prater, a billionaire venture capitalist with a private obsession, and Uma Thurman as Charlie, a former special operations officer working as his right hand. Around them, the show placed Kristen Ritter, Neil Patrick Harris, Eric Stonestreet, and David Dastmalchian as members of a group of killers gathered at Prater's invitation. The concept is a dinner party of serial murderers hosted by a wealthy collector who treats them as specimens rather than guests. For a show that had spent 18 years insisting Dexter was alone in the world, putting him at a table with people exactly like him is a significant shift. James Remar and David Zayas both returned, and Jack Alcott returned as Harrison. Stranger than any of that, John Lithgow and Jimmy Smits were both listed among the guest stars, which means Trinity and Miguel Prado were back in some form more than a decade after Dexter killed them. The franchise has now run long enough that Remar has played the same dead father across 3 separate series and 2 decades, appearing as a memory in every one of them. Very few actors have spent that long portraying a character who was already deceased before the audience met him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The sequel series was renewed almost immediately and kept adding famous killers. Fact 75, Resurrection, was renewed for a 2nd season in the autumn following its first run, and casting announcements continued into 2026. Brian Cox joined as a killer, known as the New York Ripper, a man no longer active who has found a way to keep living inside his own infamy by tormenting the people who survived him. Dan Stevens joined as another killer who taunts the police directly. Uma Thurman was confirmed to return as Charlie, Kristen Ritter returned, and Desmond Harrington came back as Joey Quinn for the first time since the original series ended. Filming began in New York in the spring of 2026, with the season expected to land later that year. The pattern is now clearly established. Each season of the sequel gathers a cast of recognizable actors playing distinct killers and places them in orbit around a man who spent his entire original run believing he was unique. That premise inverts the whole foundation of the franchise. Dexter's loneliness was the engine of the original show. He narrated because there was nobody to speak to. The sequel puts him inside a crowd of people who share his condition, which removes the isolation and replaces it with something the character has never had to manage before, which is competition. The first season of the original show has a detail almost nobody notices in the opening minutes. Fact 76. The first person Dexter kills on screen is a choir director named Mike Donovan, taken in the opening scene of the pilot. The show gives him almost no dialogue and no backstory beyond what Dexter states while standing over him. He functions as a demonstration, a way of teaching the audience the ritual before the story begins properly. That structure is doing something careful. The pilot opens on a completed murder rather than building toward one, which tells the viewer immediately that the suspense lies somewhere other than whether he will kill. He already does, routinely, and has for years. The question the series asks sits further in. The scene also establishes every element that will recur for 8 seasons in a matter of minutes. The plastic, the table, the photographs, the speech, the blood slide, the boat. By the time the opening credits arrive, the audience knows the entire procedure. Everything afterwards is variation, and the show is confident enough to lay out its whole machine in the first 5 minutes and trust that people will keep watching anyway. The Season 1 finale returns him to the exact place his life began. Fact 77. The first season ends in the shipping container where Laura Moser died, with Brian recreating the scene and inviting his brother to complete it. He has laid out the same room, the same plastic, the same tools, and he has strapped Deb to the table. Dexter is offered the choice between the family he was born into and the family he was placed with. He chooses Deb, kills his brother, and stages it as a suicide. The show then leaves him standing among cheering crowds in a parade, celebrating the capture of the ice truck killer, imagining that the applause is for him. That final image sets the terms for everything that follows. Dexter destroys the only person who ever fully understood him, in order to preserve a life built on pretending, and the world congratulates him for it. The series never gets more honest than that closing sequence, and every subsequent season is a variation on it. He gives up something real to protect something false, and receives applause each time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show is narrated by a man who admits he lies constantly. Fact 78. Everything the audience knows about Dexter comes from Dexter. The narration is not an objective account. It is delivered by a character whose defining skill is deception, who lies to his colleagues, his wife, his sister, and his police department every day, and who has never once been penalized for lying inside his own head. A long-running fan reading takes that seriously and treats the entire series as the account of an unreliable narrator. Under that reading, the emptiness he claims is a story he tells to avoid responsibility. The Dark Passenger is a fiction that turns choice into compulsion, and the code is a permission structure dressed as a restriction. The show supports this more than it admits. Repeatedly, his narration describes him feeling nothing, while his behavior shows him feeling a great deal. He says Rita is cover, and then breaks apart when she dies. He says Deb is a liability, and then kills to protect her. The voice describing the man does not match the man, and the gap between them is where the entire series actually lives. In the final season, one character takes his oldest excuse apart in a single sentence. Fact 79. Dexter refers to his urge as a passenger, something riding along inside him that makes demands he must satisfy. The phrase gives him a way to describe the killing as an external force. Dr. Vogel challenges it directly in the final season, telling him that the Dark Passenger is a fiction, a story a traumatized child invented to survive, and an adult kept using because it was convenient. The novels take the opposite position, treating the passenger as a genuine entity with its own history. The show's refusal to do that is the single largest difference between the two versions, and the reason the television character carries more weight. If the passenger is real, Dexter is a victim of something that happened to him. If it is not, he is a man who decided, and who has spent decades building an elaborate structure of rules, rituals, and narration to avoid ever saying so. Vogel's line in Season 8 is the closest the series comes to a verdict, and it arrives from the one character qualified to deliver it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. For a show about a broken mind, one kind of professional is missing from almost every episode. Fact 80. For a show about a man with an obvious psychological condition, Dexter almost never puts him in front of a therapist. He fakes an addiction to join a support group in Season 2, purely as cover, and he attends couples counseling with Rita while treating it as an obstacle. He never enters real treatment, never sits across from anyone qualified to assess him, and the only psychiatrist in the series who understands him completely turns out to be the woman who designed him. That absence is a structural decision. A therapist is a person whose entire job is noticing exactly what Dexter conceals, and putting him in that room for any length of time would collapse the series. The show handles the problem by making the only competent psychiatrist in the story complicit. Vogel does not treat him. She admires him. She is the person who told a father that his son could not be helped, and then spent decades checking on the results. The one time Dexter is examined properly by a professional, the professional turns out to be the author of his condition, which is the bleakest joke the show ever tells. Everything he owns is designed to be abandoned in under an hour. Fact 81. Dexter's apartment across the original series is almost empty. Plain furniture, bare walls, minimal possessions, nothing personal on display. He keeps a bag ready and has an exit plan for every property he occupies. The one thing in the place that matters is hidden inside a wall unit, and even that is small enough to carry out under one arm. The design is entirely practical. A man in his position cannot afford attachments to objects because objects have to be left behind. It is also the visual signature of someone who has never fully believed he is going to be allowed to stay anywhere. The contrast arrives when he marries Rita and moves into a family house full of children's drawings, framed photographs, and clutter he did not choose. He is visibly uncomfortable in it and never stops looking like a guest. When Rita dies, that house becomes unbearable to him almost immediately. The empty apartment was not a lifestyle. It was preparation, and the moment he tried to live in a real home, the show removed it within a single season. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Water appears in nearly every important moment of his life. Fact 82. The pattern runs from the first episode to the last. His mother dies in a shipping container at a port. He disposes of bodies at sea. His boat is his most trusted possession. Rita is found in a bathtub, and Trinity's victims die in bathtubs. Deb is buried in the ocean. The finale is set inside a hurricane. The revival opens on a frozen lake. Water is where Dexter puts everything he cannot keep. It receives victims, family members, evidence, and eventually the character himself, and it never gives anything back except once, when the ocean floor refused to hold his victims and produced the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. The show has never made a formal statement about the motif, and it does not need to. A man who has spent his life trying to remove traces returns constantly to the one substance that dissolves and disperses everything, and the only time his entire life nearly collapses is the one time the water fails to do its job. And that failure is the closest the series comes to arguing that nothing actually disappears. He never once, in 8 seasons, says the thing he most needs to say. Fact 83. Dexter narrates constantly. He explains his reasoning, his methods, his history, and his intentions to the audience for hours, and he tells almost none of it to another living person who survives the conversation. The people who learn what he is are Brian, Dokes, Leela, Miguel Prado, Lumen, Deb, Hannah, Vogel, and Saxon. Most of them die. That list is the show's real argument. Knowledge of Dexter is fatal. Being told the truth by him is effectively a sentence, and the character learns this early enough that he stops attempting honesty as a strategy for anything other than a kill room. The consequence is that the audience becomes his only confessor. Everything he cannot say to Deb, to Rita, to his son, he says to the camera instead. 8 seasons of narration are a man talking to a person who is not there, because every real listener has been removed. When the show finally reaches its ending and Dexter looks directly down the lens, he is acknowledging the only relationship in his life that has survived intact. His son is being raised by the same machinery that produced him. Fact 84. Harrison Morgan was 10 months old when his mother was murdered in the family bathroom, younger than Dexter was when the container door opened. He is then raised by a father who watches him constantly for signs, interprets ordinary childhood behavior through the lens of his own condition, and eventually decides the boy has the same thing he does. Whether Harrison is actually like his father is a question the franchise keeps circling without settling. What is certain is that he was told he is, by the one adult in his life, repeatedly, during the years a person forms an idea of who they are. That is precisely what Harry did to Dexter. A grown man decided a child was broken, told him so, and gave him a system for managing it. The child grew up to be exactly what the man predicted. 2 generations later, the process repeats with the same confidence and the same absence of evidence, and the franchise ends its most emotionally direct chapter with the son killing the father, using the rules the father taught him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Neither of the people who wrote the code lived to see where it ended up. Fact 85. Harry is dead. Vogel is dead. Both authors of the code are gone, and the code continues operating without them, passed to Dexter, and from Dexter to Harrison. It has survived the death of the man who delivered it, the death of the woman who designed it, the collapse of the family it was built inside, and the death of the person it was written for. That persistence is the most quietly disturbing element of the entire franchise. The code was never a moral philosophy. It was a containment procedure invented for one specific child in the early 1980s by two adults who did not know what else to do. It is now a family tradition. Harrison inherits it without ever meeting either author, receiving a set of rules assembled by strangers for a situation that no longer exists. Every generation applies it more confidently and understands it less. The franchise has spent 2 decades demonstrating that a bad idea handed down with enough love becomes indistinguishable from an inheritance, and nobody in the story has ever seriously proposed abandoning it. His own department had 8 years to catch him, and there is a reason it never did. Fact 86. Dexter works inside a police department for the entire original series while committing dozens of murders, and the department never catches him. Dokes gets close and dies. LaGuerta gets close and dies. Deb finds out and covers it up. Every other colleague works beside him for years without suspecting anything at all. The show is usually read as a story about an exceptional killer. It is at least equally a story about an institution that cannot see what is directly in front of it, because the man in question is polite, punctual, technically skilled, and generous with breakfast. That is the uncomfortable observation underneath the whole premise. Dexter is not caught for the same reason many real cases go cold, which is that suspicion follows people who seem strange rather than people who behave correctly. He learned early that performing normality is more effective than hiding, and 8 seasons of a functioning police department failing to notice a serial murderer on the payroll is the proof. The department's most reliable employee was its worst offender the entire time. The show ran for years without ever letting him be punished by the law. Fact 87. Dexter is never tried and never convicted across the entire franchise. He is arrested exactly once, in Iron Lake, by a police chief who worked out the truth on her own, and he is out of the cell and gone within hours after killing the officer guarding him. Every real consequence he faces arrives through personal loss instead. He loses his brother, his wife, his friend, his mentor, his sister, and eventually his life, and none of it comes from the justice system he spent his career working inside. The structure is deliberate, and it doubles as commentary. The code exists because the courts failed. The story then delivers a protagonist the courts get their hands on for a single night and cannot hold, which means the system in this world is incapable of processing anybody, guilty or otherwise. What replaces it is a private arrangement. Justice in Dexter is administered by individuals acting on their own judgment, and the results are catastrophic for nearly everyone involved. Dokes is destroyed by pursuing the truth alone. LaGuerta dies for it. Deb kills for it. Harrison ends up executing his own father in the snow because there is no institution left that anybody trusts to do it instead. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a pattern in who survives him, and nobody would want to be inside it. Fact 88. The list is long and very consistent. Harry takes his own life. Brian is killed by Dexter. Rita is murdered. Dokes, who never loved him but was closest to the truth, dies in a cage. Miguel Prado is killed by Dexter. Vogel is killed in front of him. LaGuerta is shot to protect him. Deb dies as a direct result of a decision she made for him. Lumen leaves, which is the only survival in the group, and requires her to walk away entirely. The only characters who last are the ones who keep a certain distance. Batista survives across 3 series because he never learns anything. Masuka survives because he is never taken seriously. The rule the franchise operates on is clear enough to write down. Proximity to Dexter is proportional to risk, and love is the highest form of proximity. He knows this by the middle of the original series and keeps forming attachments anyway, which is either the most human thing about him or the most destructive, and the show has never been willing to choose. His narration ends the same way it began, aimed at people who are not there. Fact 89. The first line the audience hears is Dexter describing the night as his own, spoken over a Miami street with nobody listening. The final moments of the original series are silent, and the last thing he does is look up into the camera. Between those 2 points, the character speaks for hundreds of hours to an audience he cannot see. The revival years later put the same device to a different use. In New Blood, he is arguing with a projection of his dead sister rather than narrating to the void, and the change measures exactly how far he has fallen. The confident voice that opened the series has become a man being interrogated by his own memory of the person he destroyed. By the time the franchise reaches its most recent chapters, the narration is still running. It has survived a finale, a death, a prequel with a different actor's face attached to it, and a resurrection. Whatever else changes, the voice continues, which suggests the voice was always the actual character rather than the man carrying it around. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. He has handed a way out more than once, and each time he does the same thing. Fact 90 Dexter is given several genuine opportunities to end the pattern and refuses every one of them. Lumen offers a partnership that ends when her urge fades, and he cannot follow her out. Hannah offers a life in another country. New Blood establishes that he went 10 years without killing, which proves the abstinence is possible, and the discipline collapses within the first episode. Each of those exits is real, available, and rejected. The show is careful about that. Nothing forces him back. There is no external villain dragging him into another kill room, no institutional pressure, no compulsion the story presents as unbeatable once Vogel has dismissed The Dark Passenger as a story. What remains is preference. The most generous reading of the character is that he is managing something he did not choose. 18 years of storytelling across 4 series keep arriving at the less generous one. He is given the door repeatedly, he sees the door clearly, and he turns around and goes back to the table, which is the closest thing to an answer the franchise has ever produced. The show's most famous image is one that was never meant to be funny. Fact 91, The Lumberjack. A bearded man in flannel, alone in a cabin in the Pacific Northwest, staring into the camera as the credits roll. It was written as the bleakest possible fate, a self-imposed exile with no death and no connection, and it became a joke almost immediately. The gap between intention and reception is the most instructive thing about it. The scene contains no dialogue, no explanation, and no emotional cue, which leaves the audience to supply meaning at the exact moment they are least willing to. 8 years of investment ended on a costume change. The franchise has been unable to leave it alone since. The revival opens by acknowledging the exile directly, giving him a new name and a new town and a new attempt at disappearing, and the first thing it does is prove the disappearance never worked. The sequel that followed reversed his death as well. What that image really demonstrates is how much weight a final frame carries. Every element of the finale had been criticized, but the beard is what survived, repeated endlessly in reaction images by people who had never seen a full episode. A decade of careful work about grief, control, and inheritance was reduced to a man in a wool shirt, and the property has spent the years since trying to earn the ending back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The anger about the ending has buried how much of modern television started here. Fact 92. When Dexter premiered in 2006, the anti-hero drama existed but was still relatively rare. The Sopranos was running, The Shield was running, and Breaking Bad was 2 years away. What Dexter did, that almost nothing else had attempted, was place the audience inside the mind of the criminal through continuous narration, so that the viewer receives his reasoning before they receive his actions. That structure spread. The decade after Dexter produced a long run of series built on the same contract, inviting audiences to spend years alongside people whose behavior they would condemn instantly in any other context, and asking them to keep watching by making the internal logic accessible. The show also demonstrated a commercial reality that changed programming decisions across the industry. A series about a serial killer, sold on a premise executives assumed was unairable, became the most watched drama a premium network had produced. Its reputation has suffered because of how it ended, and that has obscured how influential the beginning was. The first 4 seasons remain a working masterclass in how to make an audience complicit, and a large amount of what followed on television during the following decade is standing on ground Dexter cleared. The blood slides are the only trophies he never explains properly. Fact 93. Dexter offers explanations for almost everything he does. The plastic is containment. The photographs are confirmation. The boat is disposal. The code is control. The slides are the single element he describes only in vague terms, calling them a record, a habit, something he keeps. A trophy collection is standard behavior among the killers he hunts, and he knows it. He identifies trophies in other people's cases constantly, understands exactly what they mean, and continues maintaining his own without ever applying the analysis to himself. The slides also serve no practical purpose whatsoever. They are pure evidence, the single most dangerous object he owns, and their discovery is what almost destroys him in the second season. A man whose entire life is organized around eliminating traces keeps a labeled archive of every person he has killed in a box behind an air conditioning vent. The most honest reading is the simplest one. He needs proof that the life he cannot discuss with anybody actually happened. Every other part of his existence is performance, invented for other people's benefit. The slides are the only physical record that the real one exists, which makes them less like trophies and more like a diary, written by a man who cannot risk writing anything down. The show never confirms whether he is capable of love, and that is the point. Fact 94. Dexter states repeatedly that he feels nothing, that his relationships are cover, and that his affection is an imitation assembled from watching other people. His behavior contradicts him constantly. He breaks down over Rita. He kills to protect Deb. He risks everything for his son. He grieves Vogel. He hesitates over Hannah. The franchise has been running for 2 decades without resolving the contradiction, and every attempt to settle it has been reversed by the next chapter. Vogel says the emptiness is a story he tells himself. New Blood suggests he is capable of genuine paternal love, and then has him destroy it in a single night. The sequel puts him in a room full of people like him, which reopens the question in a new form. That refusal to answer is what has kept the character alive across 4 series. A monster is simple, a man is simple, something that behaves like both, narrated by a voice that cannot be trusted about either, generates arguments that outlast the show producing them. The audience has been trying to diagnose Dexter Morgan since 2006 using evidence supplied exclusively by Dexter Morgan, which is a trap the series built deliberately in its opening minutes and has never once released anybody from. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Line up the antagonists across 4 series and the same face keeps surfacing. Fact 95. Brian is Dexter without a code. Trinity is Dexter 30 years later, with a family and a routine, and a private ritual nobody suspects. Miguel Prado is Dexter with power and no restraint. Travis Marshall is Dexter, with a projected partner giving orders. Saxon is Dexter without Harry. Kurt Caldwell is Dexter as a beloved pillar of a small community. The pattern holds across every season and every series. The franchise does not really produce antagonists. It produces variations, each one isolating a single element of the protagonist and demonstrating what happens when that element is removed or amplified. That design explains why the show never runs out of material and also why it can feel repetitive. Each new killer is another attempt to answer the same question, which is whether anything separates Dexter from the men he hunts other than the rules he was handed as a child. The answer the show keeps circling is uncomfortable. The only difference is Harry, and Harry killed himself over what he had made. Every villain in the franchise is the same man with one variable adjusted, and the protagonist is simply the version who was lucky enough to be found by a police officer instead of left in the system with his brother. The container was never really left behind. Fact 96. 2 days in a shipping container at the age of 3 is the event the entire franchise is built on, and the story returns to it constantly without ever moving past it. Season 1 ends inside a recreation of that room. The blood slides are drops of the substance he sat in. The plastic sheeting is an attempt to build a container where the blood cannot spread. The kill room is the shipping container rebuilt correctly. Same enclosure, same fluid, same trapped person, with the roles reversed and the mess eliminated. He constructs it dozens of times and takes it apart afterward, over and over, for decades. Trinity spent 30 years doing the same thing with his own childhood catastrophe. Both men are rebuilding a room they were never able to leave. One of them understands the pattern and calls it a cycle. The other calls it justice. Nothing in the franchise ever releases him from it. He leaves Miami, changes his name, moves to the snow, dies, comes back, and the pattern reassembles itself immediately, because the pattern was never geographical. He has been trying to walk out of that container since he was 3 years old, and every room he builds is the same room. The most important thing his father ever taught him was not a rule. Fact 97. The code has 3 parts that get repeated across the seasons. Do not get caught. Be certain. Control it. Underneath all of them sits something Harry never stated directly and never had to, which is the instruction to conceal. Every rule assumes that Dexter's real self must never be visible to anyone, ever, under any circumstances. That instruction is far more damaging than the killing. It teaches a small child that he is unacceptable at the root, that the version of him people can see must be manufactured, and that being known is the worst thing that can happen. He carries that into every relationship he ever attempts. It is also the belief that kills nearly everyone around him. The moment someone learns the truth, Dexter's training tells him the situation is a threat rather than an opportunity, and the story follows that instruction to its conclusion again and again. Harry thought he was teaching his son to survive. What he actually taught him was that intimacy is a security failure. 2 decades of storytelling across 4 series have followed that single lesson to the end of the line, and the son who eventually pulls a trigger on him in the snow is the last student of the same curriculum. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show has now been running long enough to become a family history. Fact 98. Counting from the first novel in 2004, the Dexter story has been in continuous production and publication for more than 20 years. The original series ran 8 seasons. The novels ran 8 books. New Blood arrived 8 years after the finale. A prequel followed in 2024, and a sequel series in 2025, with a second season commissioned. Across that span, several different actors have played Dexter at different ages, from a small boy in flashbacks, to a teenager, to the young intern of the prequel, alongside new versions of Deb and Harry, and a supporting cast that has crossed decades. James Remar has now played the same dead father in 3 separate series. David Zayas has played the same detective across the entire timeline. The result is one of the more unusual structures in modern television. The property covers a character's childhood, his working life, his death, and his survival, told out of order across 4 separate shows by a group of people who kept returning to it. Clyde Phillips has now written 3 different endings for the same man. Very few storytellers get one. The franchise's inability to let the character finish is either a commercial decision or a thematic one, and given what the story is about, the distinction has stopped mattering. Every time he reaches for an ordinary life, the same thing happens to it. Fact 99. Every version of Dexter Morgan is defined by concealment, and every attempt he makes at an ordinary life is removed. He marries and becomes a father, and his wife is killed. He builds a career and a workplace family, and he loses the department. He escapes to a small town under a false name, with a girlfriend and a steady job, and it collapses within 10 episodes. The pattern is not accidental. The story cannot allow him a normal life, because the normal life is the thing he is pretending to want. Every time he gets close, he does something to end it, and the show has been careful to keep his own hand somewhere in each collapse. Rita dies because he brought Trinity into his life. Deb dies because of a choice he set in motion. Iron Lake ends because he kills a police officer rather than accept custody. The disasters are not fate, they are consequences arriving late. That is the closest thing the franchise has to a moral. He does not lose the ordinary life because the universe is cruel. He loses it because he is not willing to give up the other one, and he has been offered the choice more times than any character on television. Before we move on, if you're enjoying these facts, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The last fact is the one the show has been saying underneath every other thing it has ever said. Fact 100. 100 facts about Dexter, and they all converge on the same small detail. A 3-year-old in a shipping container, sitting in blood for 2 days, found by a police officer who decided the boy could not be saved and could only be steered. Everything after that is elaboration. The blood slides, the plastic, the boat, the code, the narration, the false names, the sun, the lumberjack, the snow, the resurrection. All of it is a man building rooms he can control, because the first room controlled him. He grows up to be a scientist of blood, which is the substance he could not escape, and he spends his adult life creating sealed spaces where it cannot go anywhere at all. The show has never once said this out loud. It shows a child in a container in the first season, and then spends 20 years demonstrating the consequences, without ever pausing to explain the connection. Every villain is a variation. Every relationship is a casualty. Every ending is reversed because the thing driving him was never resolved and cannot be. Underneath the code and the plastic and the 20 years of storytelling, Dexter Morgan is a man who was told what he was before he could speak, believed it completely, and built an entire life proving the person who told him was right. The image the franchise keeps returning to is a man alone in a crowd, in a city of millions, talking to nobody, still explaining himself to an audience that has been listening since 2006 and has never once been able to answer back. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.